It has been 9 months since Julian left. 9 long months that somehow feel like entire lifetimes stretched across my bones. And now I spend my days on my knees, scrubbing floors, just to buy myself a little more time to breathe inside the Blackwood family mansion. My name is Sebastian, and I am 23 years old. A low-class Omega from a broken home, an orphan with no family left in this world, and no cent worth remembering. If someone had told me a year ago that I would one day become a maid inside my own mother-in-law's house, I would have laughed right in their face, because even the thought would have sounded ridiculous. But life has a cruel way of turning laughter into reality. A few months before Julian left, he brought me to meet his mother for the first time, proudly telling her that I was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. I still remember the way she looked at me the moment I stepped into the massive living room, like I was something she had stepped in and forgotten to wipe off. Her sharp eyes slowly scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my worn shoes for a second longer than necessary. And in that moment, I already knew something was wrong, because the air around her felt cold despite the luxurious warmth of the mansion. Victoria Blackwood sat elegantly on the couch, one leg crossed over the other, her posture painfully straight, her fingers resting calmly against the armrest like a queen sitting on her throne. Her lips curved into something that could almost pass for a polite smile, but her eyes carried nothing but judgment. Julian sat beside me, his hand gently holding mine, his thumb occasionally brushing against my fingers as if silently telling me not to worry. His scent, smoked cedar and something darker, like rain on warm asphalt, wrapped around me the way it always did, calming the edges of my frayed nerves. But the nervousness inside my chest kept growing with every second that passed. Then Victoria finally spoke. "So," she said in a calm voice that sounded almost pleasant, "what exactly do you do for a living, Sebastian?" The question was simple, yet the way she asked it felt like a trap waiting to snap shut the moment I answered. "I work at a small bookstore near the university," I replied carefully, keeping my voice even. Her eyebrow lifted slightly, as though she had just heard something mildly disappointing. "A bookstore," she repeated slowly, leaning back against the couch as her gaze returned to me with even more scrutiny than before. "Yes, ma'am." There was a short silence before she asked the next question, her tone still calm but carrying a subtle sharpness that made my shoulders tense. "Do you perhaps hold any position in a corporate company? Maybe management or administration?" "No, ma'am," I answered honestly. "I see." She nodded slowly, as if mentally checking something off a list. "And tell me," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "do you own any estates, properties, or shares in any businesses?" My throat suddenly felt dry. "No, I don't." Her lips curved faintly, though it was far from a kind smile. "Interesting," she said. Julian squeezed my hand tighter, and I could feel the growl building in his chest before he even opened his mouth. But she cut him off with a single look. "Your family must have built something for you at least. Perhaps land or a trust fund waiting for you." The words hit deeper than she probably realized. "I'm an orphan," I said quietly, forcing the words out even though my chest tightened. "My parents passed away when I was very young. I don't have any other family." For a brief moment, the room became completely silent. But instead of sympathy, what I saw in Victoria Blackwood's eyes was disappointment. She exhaled softly, as though the final piece of information had confirmed everything she suspected. Then she turned her gaze toward her son. "This Omega," she said calmly, "does not fit your circle." My fingers tightened together on my lap as the words settled heavily in the room. She didn't even try to hide her disapproval anymore. "You are the heir of the Blackwood family," she continued, her voice growing firmer. "You run companies worth millions. You meet people of influence every day. And families like ours associate with people of equal standing." Her eyes slowly returned to me. "But this one—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The meaning was painfully clear. I lowered my gaze, trying to ignore the burning feeling spreading across my face. My own scent, honey and chamomile, soft and unassuming, had turned sour with anxiety, and I knew she could smell it. I knew everyone in that room could smell exactly how small I felt. But before the silence could stretch any longer, Julian finally spoke. "Mother," he said calmly, though there was a firmness in his voice I had rarely heard before. "I didn't bring Sebastian here for an interview." Victoria looked at him. "And what exactly did you think you brought him here for?" she asked. Julian's hand tightened gently around mine, his warmth grounding me, his cedar scent flaring just slightly, protective, possessive. "I brought him here because he's the person I'm going to marry." The words stunned the entire room. Victoria's polite expression immediately vanished. "That is impossible," she said coldly. "It's already decided," Julian replied without hesitation. Her voice rose slightly as she stood from the couch. "You cannot marry this poor Omega. At least get someone worthy enough to complement your status. He is the only one, Mother. He doesn't have to suit your standards. I am the one getting married to him, not you," Julian said simply. Victoria crossed her arms, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "I will find someone better for you," she said sharply. "Someone worthy of standing beside a Blackwood." But Julian didn't even look conflicted. "I'm not interested in anyone else," he replied. He lifted my hand gently, holding it firmly in front of her. "I'm getting engaged to Sebastian." And that was exactly what happened. Despite his mother's clear disapproval, Julian Blackwood got engaged to me. A poor Omega with no family, no wealth, and no status to speak of. For a brief moment after the engagement, I foolishly believed things might improve. They did not. Victoria Blackwood never hid her hatred for me. Whenever I walked through the mansion hallways, I could feel her gaze burning into my back. And sometimes when I passed by her, she would click her tongue softly or let out a faint hiss of irritation, as though my mere presence offended her. The scent of her displeasure, bitter lavender and wilted roses, followed me everywhere, a constant reminder that I did not belong. Julian always tried to comfort me whenever he noticed my discomfort. "Don't worry about her," he told me once while holding my hands reassuringly, his thumbs rubbing slow circles into my palms. His scent wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and safe. "She'll accept you eventually." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. Then one evening, about a month after our engagement, Julian came to my room looking more serious than usual. He sat down beside me on the bed and gently held my hands between his. His scent was different that night, less of the usual calm cedar and more of something restless, like the smoke before a fire. "Sebastian," he said softly, "I need to travel overseas." My heart immediately sank. "For how long?" I asked quietly. 3 months, he answered. 3 months suddenly felt incredibly long. My fingers curled around his instinctively, as if I could keep him there by touch alone. "My father wants me to personally oversee the construction of one of our new companies abroad," he explained, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. "It's a massive project. Multi-million-dollar. They need someone with authority on site, and the board won't sign off unless it's me." I tried to hide my disappointment, but Julian noticed it instantly. He lifted my chin gently, so I would look at him. "Hey," he murmured with a small smile. "Don't make that face. It's just 3 months. That's still a long time," I whispered. He chuckled softly before leaning forward and pressing a gentle kiss against my forehead. His lips lingered there for a moment, and I breathed him in smoked cedar, warm asphalt after rain, something dark and rich like whiskey. My Omega instincts curled happily inside my chest, even as my heart ached. "Then count the days," he said. "I promise I'll come back once everything is settled. Then we will proceed with the wedding." At that moment, I believed every word he said. The morning Julian left the mansion, the entire place suddenly felt different, as though the warmth that once filled those grand hallways had quietly disappeared along with him. I stood by the tall windows for a long time after his car vanished down the long driveway, holding on to the promise he had given me the night before and repeating his words inside my head like a fragile prayer. 3 months. That was what he said. 3 months wasn't forever, I told myself. And if I just waited patiently, everything would return to normal once he came back. For the first few days after his departure, nothing seemed out of place. Victoria Blackwood behaved the same way she always had, distant and cold, but still maintaining the polished lightness she wore like a mask whenever people were watching. And although she rarely spoke to me directly, she didn't openly confront me either. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things that were easy to ignore at first. Then one morning, when I tried to enter the kitchen to make myself breakfast, the head maid suddenly stepped in front of me with an awkward smile and said the kitchen was now restricted to staff only. She explained that Madame Victoria had given new instructions about maintaining proper order inside the mansion. I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. Instead, I simply went back to my room and waited until breakfast was served. But when the time came, no one brought anything to me until lunch. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. But the same thing happened the next day, and the day after that. Whenever I asked the staff politely, they would only lower their heads and say they were following Madame's instructions. Soon, even the small privileges I had quietly enjoyed disappeared one by one. The driver no longer responded when I asked for the car. The security guard stopped greeting me. Even the house staff who once spoke kindly to me now avoided eye contact whenever I passed them in the hallways. It felt as though I had suddenly become invisible inside the mansion, or perhaps simply unwelcome. Weeks passed slowly, each day growing heavier than the last. And although I tried calling Julian several times, desperate just to hear his voice, to smell his scent through the phone, even though I knew that was impossible, Victoria forbade me from using the house line, which had his number saved. And she took my phone away from me eventually, telling me that Julian was busy overseas and that I shouldn't disturb him unnecessarily. Focus on resting, she would say with that same cold voice, her bitter lavender scent filling the room like poison. But the loneliness inside the mansion grew unbearable with each passing day. Then, one morning, something unexpected happened. I had just woken up when a sudden wave of nausea hit me so strongly that I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting into the sink. My hands trembled as I held onto the edge of the counter, my breathing uneven while the dizziness slowly faded. It had been happening for a few days already, but that morning felt worse than the others. I rinsed my mouth and stepped out of the bathroom, still feeling weak, only to freeze when I noticed someone standing quietly in the doorway of my room. Victoria Blackwood. She stood there with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes watching me carefully. And for a moment, neither of us said anything as the silence stretched between us. Her scent, always so controlled, so deliberate, seemed sharper than usual, like she was testing the air around me, reading something I couldn't see. Then she slowly walked into the room. "You've been vomiting often lately," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't questioning. It was certain. My heart began to race. She stopped a few steps away from me, her eyes lowering briefly to my stomach before returning to my face. Then her lips curled into a cold smile. "So," she said, "you're pregnant." The words left my body frozen in place. I hadn't even confirmed it myself yet, but hearing it spoken out loud suddenly made everything feel real. My fingers slowly moved toward my stomach without thinking, and I could feel my own scent shift. Honey and chamomile. Yes, but underneath that, something new. Something warm and sweet and deeply, instinctively maternal. Victoria noticed, and the expression on her face hardened instantly. "I knew it," she muttered. For a moment, she looked almost furious. Then she laughed softly, though there was no warmth in the sound. "How convenient. Trying to secure your place in this family with a child." "That's not true," I started to say, but she cut me off immediately. "Enough," she snapped. Her voice echoed sharply through the room. She took a slow step closer, her gaze piercing through me. "Let me make something very clear, Sebastian," she said coldly. "You will not trap my son with this child." My chest tightened painfully. "You forced yourself into my son's life and made him turn against me," she said with a loud, cold voice. Tears rolled down my cheeks as the accusation hung heavily in the air. My Omega instinct screamed at me to submit, to look away, to make myself small. But something else, something deeper, made me keep my hand pressed against my stomach. Then suddenly Victoria's expression changed. The anger faded, replaced by something calculating. She looked around my room briefly, before turning back to me. "If you truly intend to stay here and wait for Julian," she said slowly, "then you'll have to earn that privilege." I frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Her smile returned, but it was colder than before. "You will work." The word stunned me. "Work?" I repeated quietly. "Yes," she said calmly. "If you wish to continue living under this roof, you will earn your place like everyone else." My stomach tightened nervously. "You have no family," she continued, her tone almost casual. "No home, no money, nowhere else to go." Every word she spoke felt like a knife pressing deeper into my chest. "So," she said, "if you truly wish to remain here until Julian returns, you will work for it." My voice trembled slightly. "What kind of work?" Victoria looked at me with a satisfied expression. "Cleaning," she replied simply. And just like that, my life inside the Blackwood mansion changed overnight. The same mansion that once felt like a shelter slowly turned into something else entirely. Because from that day forward, I was no longer treated as Julian Blackwood's fiancé. I became nothing more than a maid living inside his mother's house. 3 months. That was the promise Julian gave me the night before he left. And for the first 2 months, I held on to those words tightly, waking up every morning with a quiet hope that maybe today would be the day his car would appear at the gates of the mansion again. That maybe today I would hear his familiar footsteps echoing through the hallway, calling my name the way he always did. But 3 months came and went, and Julian Blackwood never came home. At first, I tried to convince myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps the overseas project required more time than expected. Perhaps his father had asked him to stay longer. But as the days continued to pass, the worry inside my chest slowly grew heavier. I tried asking Victoria once. It was a mistake. "Madam, do you know when Julian might be returning?" I asked carefully one evening while she was sitting in the living room, reviewing some documents. She didn't even look up at me. "My son is extremely busy," she replied coldly. "You should stop worrying about things that don't concern you." Her answer ended the conversation immediately. After that, I stopped asking. Instead, I continued working. Every single day. Cleaning hallways, scrubbing floors, washing dishes. My hands, once soft from nothing more demanding than turning book pages, became rough and cracked. My knees grew sore from hours of kneeling on marble. My back ached constantly, though at first I didn't know why. And while the days passed slowly, my body began to change. My belly grew little by little, the curve becoming more visible with each month that slipped away. And although the child growing inside me should have been something joyful, the reality around me made everything feel painfully lonely. No one inside the mansion treated me like Julian Blackwood's fiancé anymore. That title had quietly disappeared the moment Victoria declared that I had to earn my stay. To the staff, I was no longer the young Omega their young master loved. I was simply the pregnant maid. Some of them avoided me completely. Others stared openly whenever I passed by, their eyes lingering on my stomach as whispers quietly followed me through the corridors. Sometimes I could hear them. "Is that really the young master's child? Madam doesn't seem to think so. Poor thing. Look at him." A few of them looked at me with pity. Others looked at me with clear disdain, as though I had somehow tricked my way into the mansion and was now paying the price for it. But no matter how heavy the whispers became, I continued working. Because Victoria Blackwood had made one thing very clear from the start. If I stopped working, I would be thrown out of the mansion immediately. And I had nowhere else to go. The months slowly passed like that, my body growing heavier while my hope grew thinner with each day Julian failed to return. Then the 9th month arrived. By that time, even simple movements had become exhausting. My back constantly ached from the weight of my belly, and my ankles swelled so badly some mornings that I could barely fit into my shoes. My scent had changed too. The honey and chamomile now layered with something richer, creamier, the unmistakable fragrance of an omega close to term. Every alpha in the mansion must have been able to smell it, though none of them acknowledged me. And yet, Victoria never showed the slightest hint of sympathy. Whenever she saw me struggling with my chores, her expression remained perfectly neutral, as if watching a pregnant omega scrub floors was completely ordinary. One morning, while I was kneeling in the hallway polishing the marble floor, I suddenly heard the sharp sound of heels approaching from behind. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Victoria Blackwood stopped a few steps away from me. "Sebastian," she said. I quickly placed the cloth aside and stood up carefully, despite the discomfort in my back and the way my belly made the movement awkward. "Yes, madam." She looked at me for a moment before speaking again. "You will be going to the company today." I blinked in confusion. "The company?" Her tone remained calm, almost casual. "You will clean the floors there." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "The company floors?" I repeated slowly, but she didn't respond. My mind struggled to process the words. The Blackwood Company headquarters was enormous, a place filled with hundreds of employees who worked under Julian's authority, and Victoria was telling me to go there, to clean the floors. A knot tightened painfully in my chest. "Madam, aren't there already cleaners working there?" I asked carefully. Her expression hardened immediately. "That is not your concern," she replied sharply. "And this should be the last time you ask me silly questions." I lowered my gaze, but the humiliation burning inside me made it impossible to stay silent. "There must be many employees there," I continued quietly. "If they see me—" "If they see you doing what?" she interrupted sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Working." The single word made my throat close. "You seem to be forgetting something, Sebastian," she said coldly. "You are only here because I allowed you to stay." I didn't respond. Her voice grew sharper. "If you're so unhappy with the work I give you, you are free to leave the mansion right now." My heart skipped nervously. I had no home, no family, not even money. And now I was 9 months pregnant, so close to my due date that every Braxton Hicks contraction sent a spike of fear through my chest. Victoria watched my silence carefully before speaking again, her tone suddenly calm. "So," she said, "will you go clean the floors at the company? Or will you leave?" The choice wasn't really a choice. After a long moment, I lowered my head. "I'll go." A satisfied look appeared briefly on her face. "Good," she replied. And that was how I ended up standing inside the enormous Blackwood Company building later that day, holding a bucket and a cleaning brush while dozens of employees walked past me through the marble lobby. The building was even more intimidating than I had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, polished white marble that reflected the morning light like a mirror, a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling, dripping crystals that caught the sun and scattered it across the walls. Everyone moved with purpose. Suits and expensive shoes, tablets and important documents. The entire ecosystem of corporate power flowing around me like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture. I kept my head down as I knelt by the entrance, dipping my brush into the soapy water and scrubbing at a section of floor that already looked perfectly clean. But Victoria had been specific about her instructions. Every floor, every corner. Don't let anyone see you slacking. Soon, the whispers began spreading quietly across the lobby as people slowed their steps to look at me. Their eyes moved from my face down to the large curve of my stomach before quickly glancing away again. Some of them looked at me with pity, their expressions soft, almost sympathetic. Others didn't bother hiding their disdain at all, their eyes filled with judgment as if I were nothing more than a disgraceful sight inside such an elegant building. I kept my head down, and I kept scrubbing the floor, because humiliation was still better than having nowhere to sleep. The days that followed blurred together into a painful rhythm. Every morning, I arrived at the Blackwood Company building with the same bucket, the same cleaning cloth and brush, and the same quiet determination to survive one more day. The employees grew used to seeing me. The whispers became background noise. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling nothing at all. That Monday morning had started no differently from the others. The company lobby was as grand as always, the tall glass walls letting in streams of bright sunlight that reflected beautifully across the polished marble floors while employees hurried back and forth, carrying documents and tablets, too busy with their own responsibilities to pay much attention to the heavily pregnant Omega kneeling quietly near the center of the hall. I had grown used to their stares already, but eventually everyone returned to their work, leaving me alone with the sound of my brush sliding slowly across the marble floor. My back ached as I bent forward slightly, my belly pressing uncomfortably against my thighs while I continued scrubbing the surface in slow circles. A contraction rippled through my abdomen, mild, manageable, and I paused to breathe through it, one hand pressed against my stomach. Not yet, I thought. Just a little longer. I had been having contractions on and off for the past 2 days. Nothing regular. Nothing consistent. But every single one reminded me that time was running out, that this baby was going to come whether I was ready or not, whether Julian was back or not. I lowered my brush back to the floor and kept scrubbing. Then suddenly something changed. At first, it was just noise outside the building. Then the sound of car doors opening, one after another, too many to count. Within seconds, the atmosphere inside the building shifted completely as several employees near the entrance suddenly straightened their posture, whispering excitedly among themselves before rushing toward the front doors. The whispers spread quickly through the lobby as more employees began walking briskly toward the entrance, clearly eager to greet whoever had just arrived. But I stayed where I was, because whoever had arrived had nothing to do with me. So I simply kept scrubbing the floor. The doors opened moments later, and footsteps entered the building. Some hurried, some steady, and one set that stood out above the rest, slow and confident, carrying the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to rush anywhere. I didn't look up. My focus remained on the stubborn spot beneath my cloth as I continued working. Then the footsteps moved past me. Tall, polished shoes walked right across the edge of my vision, followed by several other people trailing closely behind the same person. Whoever it was, they were important. But I didn't bother raising my head. The footsteps continued forward toward the elevators. Then suddenly they stopped. A strange silence followed. I didn't notice it at first. I was too focused on the floor, on the rhythmic motion of my brush, on the quiet counting in my head that helped me get through each day. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. But the next moment, those same footsteps began moving again, this time coming back toward me. Slow and deliberate. I was still wiping the marble when a sudden shadow fell across the floor in front of me. Before I could even react, a strong hand suddenly grabbed my wrist. The sudden contact startled me so badly that the brush slipped from my fingers and clattered across the floor. I looked up immediately, and my entire world froze. Julian Blackwood stood right in front of me. For a moment, neither of us moved. His hand was still holding my wrist, but the moment our eyes met, his grip loosened slightly as pure shock spread across his face. His gaze slowly traveled from my face down to my enormous stomach, then back to my face again. Sebastian. My heart nearly stopped. Hearing his voice again after so many months, deep, rough, disbelieving, sent a shockwave through my entire body. He looked exactly the same as I remembered. Tall, intimidating, broad shoulders under an expensive charcoal suit, dark hair swept back from his forehead, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His presence filled the entire space around him without effort, his alpha pheromones rolling off him in waves so powerful that I could feel them pressing against my senses. But his usual calm composure had completely vanished. His eyes remained locked on the large curve of my belly, wide with disbelief. Sebastian, he said again, and this time his voice cracked. What? He couldn't even finish the sentence. I stared back at him just as stunned, my lips parted, my chest heaving. His scent hit me like a physical force, smoked cedar and rain on asphalt, but stronger than I remembered, richer, darker. It wrapped around me and pulled at something deep in my Omega instincts, something that had been starving for him for 9 months. Julian. The name left my lips almost like a whisper. For a moment, it felt like I was dreaming. But the warmth of his hand around my wrist, still there, still holding on, reminded me that he was truly standing there, right in front of me. After 9 months. His voice suddenly hardened with confusion and something darker, something that sounded like the beginning of fury. "What are you doing on the floor?" he demanded. The question echoed through the lobby. Dozens of employees nearby had already stopped moving, their eyes fixed on the shocking scene unfolding before them. I could feel their stares burning into my skin, could hear the sharp intake of breath from the assistant standing behind Julian. But I couldn't summon the courage to answer him. So instead of answering, I simply forced a small smile onto my face, the same smile I had learned to wear over the past 9 months, the one that said I'm fine when everything inside me was screaming otherwise. "I'm fine," I said softly. The moment he saw that smile, something inside his expression cracked. His grip on my hand tightened again. "You're pregnant," he said slowly, his voice growing colder with every word. "And you're scrubbing floors." I didn't respond. The silence around us became suffocating. Julian slowly lifted his head and looked around the massive lobby. Hundreds of employees stood scattered across the room, all staring nervously at their returning Zoe. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, and I knew that he could smell it. The exhaustion, the stress, the way my normally soft honey chamomile scent had turned thin and worn down, like a candle burning at both ends. Then Julian's voice suddenly echoed sharply across the building. "Everyone." The word boomed through the lobby like thunder. People froze instantly. Within seconds, employees from nearby offices and hallways began gathering in the lobby, confused and anxious, as Julian Blackwood's furious gaze swept across the crowd. Nearly 400 people stood there watching. Julian's voice turned dangerously calm. "Can someone explain to me why a heavily pregnant Omega is on his knees cleaning the floors of my company?" No one answered. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Then one employee finally stepped forward nervously. A middle-aged beta in a cheap suit, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "Sir." Julian's eyes snapped toward him. "Yes." The man swallowed nervously. We couldn't do anything about it, sir. We were told." "Told what?" Julian's voice was ice. The employee hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty to the Blackwood family and the very real terror of the man standing in front of him. Finally, he spoke the truth. "It was Madame Victoria's order, sir." The moment those words left his mouth, the entire atmosphere in the lobby turned deadly cold. Julian's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His scent shifted, the smoked cedar turning acrid, the rain on asphalt becoming something sharper, more dangerous. His alpha pheromones flooded the room with such intensity that several omegas in the crowd stepped back instinctively, and even the betas looked uncomfortable. "You stood here," Julian said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper now, "and you watched this happen." No one dared speak. Julian suddenly turned toward the assistant who had arrived with him, a young beta woman with wide eyes and a tablet clutched to her chest. "Call HR," he ordered coldly. "Right now." The assistant looked stunned. "Sir." His voice dropped even lower, more dangerous. "Everyone present in this building today is fired. Every single person who saw my pregnant Omega on his knees scrubbing floors and did nothing." A wave of shocked gasps filled the lobby. Disbelief rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back let out a strangled noise that might have been a protest. Julian glanced around the massive crowd of employees one last time, his eyes hard and unforgiving. "Get out," he said. "All of you. HR will process your terminations by the end of the week." No one moved for a long, terrible moment. Then, slowly, people began shuffling toward the exits. Some looked devastated. Some looked furious. Most just looked shell-shocked, like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. But Julian Blackwood didn't even look at them anymore. His movements were suddenly much softer now. He knelt down in front of me, this powerful alpha CEO in his $1,000 suit, kneeling on the wet marble floor beside his Omega, and gently took the brush from my numb fingers. His other hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "You're coming home with me," he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. "Julian." No. His voice cracked again. No arguments. You're coming home. One hand slid down to support my back, the other wrapped carefully around my arm as he helped me to my feet. My body protested every movement, my back screaming, my ankles throbbing, my belly so heavy that I felt like I might tip forward at any moment. But Julian held me steady, his strong arm around my waist, his body pressed against my side like a shield. Then he looked down at my stomach again, and the anger burning inside his eyes only grew stronger. How far along are you? He asked, his voice rough. I swallowed hard. 9 months. I'm due any day now. His entire body went rigid. I could feel the tremor that ran through him, the way his arm tightened around me, like he was afraid I might disappear. 9 months, he repeated slowly. You've been pregnant this whole time. And my mother, he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Julian, I said softly, reaching up to touch his face. I'm okay. The baby is okay. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to my palm, his eyes closed, his breath shaky against my skin. We're going home, he said again. And we're never going back to that mansion. Within minutes, we were sitting inside the back seat of his car as it sped away from the company building. The city passed quickly outside the tinted windows, while the silence inside the car felt strangely heavy. Julian kept glancing at me every few seconds, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and lingering fury, as though he was still trying to process everything he had just seen. Are you okay? He asked again. I nodded quietly. I'm fine. But he clearly didn't believe me. His gaze moved briefly toward my hands, resting on top of my belly, and I saw his expression shift as he noticed the small scars and rough patches that had formed over the past months of constant cleaning. The cracked knuckles, the raw patches between my fingers, the red, chapped skin that no amount of lotion could fix. His jaw tightened again. Sebastian, he said, and there was so much pain in his voice that it made my heart clench. Instead of answering his unfinished question, I asked one of my own. What took you so long? The words came out softer than I expected. Not accusatory, just tired. Julian exhaled slowly before leaning back into the seat, running a hand through his dark hair. His scent had settled somewhat, still sharp with residual anger, but underneath that, I could smell something else. Exhaustion, guilt, relief. On the day the construction got completed, he said, it suddenly collapsed. The entire east wing of the building came down. We had to start all over again from the foundation. It's a multi-million-dollar project, and my father insisted I stay there until everything was finalized. He said it was my responsibility, my reputation on the line. He rubbed his forehead tiredly, and I noticed for the first time how worn he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, a faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. I tried calling you many times, he continued. Every day for the first 2 months. But every time I spoke to my mother, she told me you were resting. She said you were doing fine, that you were happy and healthy, and that I shouldn't worry. My chest tightened. She told me, Julian went on, his voice growing harder, that you had decided to stay at the mansion while I was gone because you wanted to bond with her. She made it sound like everything was perfect. I let out a small, bitter laugh. Perfect, I repeated. Julian turned toward me, and the look on his face, raw, devastated, furious at himself, made my throat close up. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so sorry, Sebastian. I should have known. I should have flown back the moment I couldn't reach you directly. I should have. You didn't know. I interrupted gently. She hid everything from you. That doesn't excuse it. His voice cracked again. I left you alone with her. I left you alone, and you were pregnant, and she made you scrub floors like a servant. I didn't have the energy to argue with him. Instead, I simply leaned my head against his shoulder and let his scent wrap around me. Smoked cedar. Rain on warm asphalt. Home. Just take me home, Julian, I whispered. That's all I want. His arm came around me, pulling me closer, his hand resting gently on the curve of my belly. I felt his breath catch as he touched my stomach for the first time, felt the way his fingers trembled slightly against the stretched fabric of my dress. "I'm not leaving you again," he murmured against my hair, his voice firm despite the emotion thick in his throat. "I promise. Never again." When the car finally arrived at the Blackwood mansion, Julian stepped out first before gently helping me down from the vehicle. His hand held mine carefully as we walked toward the front doors together, and I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere in the house instantly shifted. Julian didn't slow down. Instead, he walked straight into the grand living room, his grip still firm around my hand. "Mother," he called out, his voice echoing loudly through the mansion. A few seconds later, Victoria Blackwood appeared from the hallway. Her expression brightened immediately when she saw her son standing there. "Julian," she said happily, her voice warm in a way it had never been with me. "You're finally home." But Julian's face remained completely expressionless. The warmth in her smile slowly faded as she noticed the coldness in his eyes. "Mother," he said slowly, "I'm very disappointed in you." Victoria blinked in surprise. "What are you talking about?" Julian gestured toward me, standing beside him. Victoria glanced briefly at my stomach, her eyes flicking down and back up in less than a second, before looking back at her son. Her expression quickly shifted into one of mild annoyance. "Oh, that," she said dismissively. Then she sighed. "Julian, you're misunderstanding the situation." I felt Julian's hand tighten around mine. "It was his own choice to work," Victoria continued smoothly, her voice calm and reasonable. "I told him many times to leave the mansion if he wasn't comfortable. But he insisted on staying." Her lips curled slightly. "You know how stubborn these low-class Omegas can be. They'll do anything to hold on to a piece of the good life." The moment those words left her lips, the entire hall fell silent. My fingers tightened slightly around Julian's sleeve, but I forced myself to stay quiet. My heart was beating so loudly inside my chest that I was certain everyone could hear it. Victoria looked at me with a mocking smile, her eyes filled with cold amusement. But I lowered my gaze immediately. I'd already learned that speaking back to her would only make things worse. So I stayed quiet. Just when I thought the tension couldn't grow worse, she suddenly walked closer to Julian, her voice becoming sweet and gentle as if nothing had happened moments ago. "Julian," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "You are a powerful alpha now. You control several of the family's companies, and your future is incredibly bright." She paused, her eyes flicking toward me with barely concealed contempt. "Naturally, you deserve someone better." Julian's face had turned completely cold. "Better?" he repeated slowly. "Yes," she said proudly. "Someone with status. Someone with connections. Someone who can actually help you build something, not just cling to your coattails." She then turned toward the hallway behind her and snapped her fingers. My heart dropped. Soft footsteps echoed from the corridor. Then she appeared. An Omega walked into the hall with graceful steps, her posture elegant and confident like someone who had been raised in wealth and luxury her entire life. Her long silk dress shimmered under the chandelier lights, and her beauty was the kind that could easily captivate anyone the moment they saw her. She was dazzling. Perfect. Everything I was not. The Omega stopped beside Victoria and bowed politely, her honey blonde hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. "This," Victoria said proudly, gesturing toward her, "is the ambassador's daughter." The beautiful Omega gave Julian a gentle smile, lowering her eyes shyly like the perfect, demure Omega any powerful family would desire. "She would make a far more suitable partner for you," Victoria continued calmly. "Our families will become even stronger allies. Imagine the connections, the influence, the power." Julian. For a moment, no one spoke. Julian simply stared at her. Then he laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a laugh filled with disbelief, with bitter realization, with a kind of anger that had been building for years. "You are unbelievable," he said. Victoria's smile slowly faded. "If you want the ambassador's daughter so badly," Julian continued, his voice calm and sharp as a blade, "then you might as well offer her to father." My eyes widened. The entire hall went completely still. Before I could even react, Victoria lifted her hand and slapped Julian across the cheek. The sharp sound echoed loudly through the mansion. Julian's head moved slightly to the side as her hand struck his face, a red mark blooming across his skin almost instantly. "You insolent child," she snapped angrily. My heart jumped in fear. Without thinking, I immediately stepped closer and held his arm. "Julian, please," I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. "You should ignore everything she said." I continued quietly, forcing a small smile even though my chest hurt. "I'm fine. And the baby is fine, too." Julian looked down at me for a moment, and the anger in his eyes softened just slightly. Victoria chuckled. "Oh, really?" she mocked. "What baby?" Her sharp gaze turned toward me again. "For all we know," she continued coldly, "that child might belong to some random man you slept with while Julian was gone. You Omegas are all the same. No self-control. No loyalty. Just desperate grasping for anything with a knot." The moment those words left her mouth, I felt Julian's body tense beside me. The warmth in his eyes disappeared completely. His expression turned dangerously cold. "Get out," he said quietly. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out," Julian repeated, his voice rising. "Both of you." "Leave?" "No." The ambassador's daughter looked startled, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment before she turned and hurried out of the room. Victoria, however, stood her ground, her arms crossed over her chest. "You would choose this nobody, over your own family?" she demanded. Julian pulled me closer to his side, one arm wrapped protectively around my waist. "The child is mine," he said firmly, his voice echoing across the hall. "I trust the word of my Omega more than yours. Always." Those words stunned everyone. I felt my throat tighten. Victoria's face twisted with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed. But Julian didn't step back. Instead, he pulled me even closer, his body a solid wall between me and his mother. "If you want to tell Father about this, go ahead," he said calmly. "I don't care if I lose my status. I don't care if I lose my inheritance. I don't care if I lose every single thing the Blackwood name has ever given me." His arm tightened around me. "As long as I have him, that is enough." My heart trembled hearing those words. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. Julian's mother stared at him in disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But Julian wasn't finished. "If you truly want another son," he added coldly, his eyes flicking toward the doorway where the ambassador's daughter had disappeared, "then perhaps she can give Father another heir instead." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Before Victoria could even respond, Julian turned around. "Come," he said softly to me, gently holding my hand. I nodded quietly. Even though my heart was trembling, I followed him without hesitation. Together, we walked toward the mansion doors. Behind us, Victoria's furious voice rang through the hall. "I will tell your father about this," she shouted angrily. "You will regret humiliating me like this, Julian. Do you hear me? You will regret it." But Julian didn't stop. He didn't even look back. The massive doors closed behind us with a loud final sound. And as we stepped outside the mansion together, I realized Julian had just chosen me over his entire family. The ride away from the mansion was quiet. I sat beside him in the back seat of the car, my hands resting gently over my swollen belly, while my mind tried to process everything that had just happened. And even though I had suffered for months inside that mansion, leaving it behind like that still felt unreal. Like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Julian's hand never left mine. His thumb traced slow circles over my knuckles, and his scent, that familiar smoked cedar and rain, wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Every few minutes, he would lift our joined hands and press a kiss to my fingers, as if reassuring himself that I was real, that I was here, that I wasn't going to disappear. "Where are we going?" I asked quietly after a while. Julian's jaw tightened. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere she can't touch us." After almost an hour of driving, the car finally slowed. When I looked outside the window, I realized we were somewhere far away from the Blackwood family estate, miles and miles of open countryside, rolling hills covered in wildflowers, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Tall iron gates opened slowly, revealing a beautiful private estate hidden behind rows of tall trees and wide gardens that stretched as far as my eyes could see. The house itself was stunning, old stone and warm wood, ivy climbing up one wall, large windows that caught the golden light of the setting sun. It looked nothing like the cold, sterile elegance of the Blackwood mansion. This place felt alive. Julian led me inside the house himself, one hand on the small of my back, the other carrying a small bag that one of the guards had handed him. The place was quiet and peaceful. It didn't feel cold like the Blackwood mansion. It smelled like him, cedar and rain, warmth and safety. As soon as we stepped inside the living room, Julian suddenly stopped walking. When I turned to look at him, I saw the expression on his face change. It was filled with something heavy, something raw. Slowly, he reached for my hands. When his fingers turned my palms upward, I saw his eyes darken. There were small scars on my hands, marks left behind from months of scrubbing floors and carrying heavy buckets of water. The skin was rough and cracked in places, red and raw at the knuckles. Julian's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice was low, filled with guilt. He gently brushed his thumb over one of the faint scars, his touch impossibly gentle. "I should have come back sooner. I should have protected you. I should have." I shook my head lightly. "It's not your fault." But he didn't look convinced. Before I could say anything else, Julian suddenly pulled me into his arms. His embrace was strong and warm, the kind that made the exhaustion I had been carrying for months suddenly feel lighter. His scent surrounded me completely, and for the first time in 9 months, I felt like I could breathe. "I missed you," he murmured softly into my hair. "Every single day. I thought about you constantly." I kept telling myself, just a few more weeks, just a little longer, and then I can go home to him. My heart trembled hearing those words. Then he gently lifted my chin. His eyes searched my face for a moment, taking in the dark circles, the thinness of my cheeks, the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix, before he leaned down and kissed me. The kiss was slow and warm, gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid I might break. Then deeper, hungrier, filled with months of longing that neither of us had been able to express. His hand cupped the back of my neck, holding me close, and I melted into him completely. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it more before I left. I should have said it every single day. But I love you, Sebastian. And I'm never letting you go again." Tears slipped down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that the long nightmare was finally over. "I love you too," I whispered back. The next few days passed peacefully. For once, I wasn't waking up before sunrise to scrub marble floors. For once, no one was shouting orders at me or sneering at me in hallways. For once, I could eat without someone watching to make sure I didn't take too much. Julian rarely left my side. He was always checking if I had eaten, if I was tired, if the baby was kicking. Every time I shifted or made a small sound of discomfort, he was there, his hand on my back, his scent wrapping around me in soothing waves. Sometimes he would place his large hand over my belly and talk softly to our unborn child, his voice becoming gentle in a way I had never heard before. He would tell her about the world outside, about the gardens and the trees, about the stars at night, about how much he already loved her even though he hadn't met her yet. "Daddy's going to spoil you rotten," he murmured one evening, his cheek pressed against my stomach while our daughter kicked enthusiastically against his palm. "You're going to have so many toys, so many dresses. Anything you want, baby girl. Anything at all." I laughed softly, my fingers threading through his dark hair. "You're going to turn her into a monster." "A beautiful monster," he corrected, pressing a kiss to my belly. "The most beautiful monster in the world." But on the 4th day, everything suddenly changed. Julian received the call while we were eating breakfast. I watched his expression shift from relaxed to tense in the space of a single sentence. "My father is back," he said after ending the call, his jaw tight. "He wants to see me." I slowly nodded, even though my heart clenched with anxiety. "You should go see him." Julian walked around a table and gently held my face in his hands. "I'll only be gone for 3 hours," he promised. "Maybe less. I'll talk to him, explain everything, and then I'll come right back." Then he turned to the guards standing nearby, 8 large men in dark suits who've been stationed around the estate since we arrived. "I want every entrance secured," he ordered coldly. "Do not leave his side for any reason. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." A caretaker was also assigned to stay with me while he was gone, a kind-faced beta woman named Martha who smelled like fresh bread and lavender. After giving several more instructions, Julian leaned down and kissed my forehead. His lips lingered there for a moment, and I breathed in his scent, memorizing it. "I'll be back soon," he said. Then he left. The house suddenly felt quiet again. Not cold, not hostile, just empty. I slowly walked around the living room, one hand resting on my belly as I tried to keep myself distracted. Martha offered to make me tea. I accepted, more for something to do than because I actually wanted it. I was standing by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, when a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the windowsill. Another wave of pain followed, stronger this time, deeper, radiating from my lower back all the way around to my front. I gasped softly. "No," I thought. "Not yet. Not now." My breathing became uneven as I slowly looked down at my belly. Another contraction came, forcing a groan from my lips. A small, breathless laugh escaped me despite the pain. "You little troublemaker," I murmured, rubbing my belly with a trembling hand. "You couldn't even wait for your father to come back, could you?" But the pain kept increasing, intensifying. By the time the third contraction hit, I couldn't stand properly anymore. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the back of the couch to keep from falling. A cry slipped from my mouth. The bodyguards outside heard it immediately. Within seconds, the door burst open, and one of them rushed forward, a large alpha with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Mr. Sebastian, what's wrong?" I think another contraction cut off my words, and I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. "I think the baby is coming." Everything moved quickly after that. The guards carefully helped me into the car while one of them immediately called Julian. I could hear the panic in his voice through the phone, even from across the car. "What do you mean the baby is coming?" "I'm on my way. Tell him I'm on my way." The ride felt endless. Every contraction made my fingers tighten around the seat, made my vision go white at the edges. Martha held my hand from the front seat, talking to me in a calm, steady voice that I could barely hear over the roaring in my ears. But finally we arrived. Doctors and nurses rushed me inside while the bodyguards handled the paperwork. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear and hope all tangled together. Someone helped me into a gown. Someone else started in 4. Voices swirled around me, questions, instructions, words I couldn't quite process. Not long after, I heard hurried footsteps outside the delivery room. Julian had arrived. Even though the door separated us, I could hear the panic in his voice as he spoke to the doctors. "Is he okay? Is the baby okay? Can I go in there? Please, I need to see him." But by then, the contractions had become too strong for me to focus on anything else. Hours seemed to pass. Maybe they did. I lost track of time completely. Pain, breathing, voices, more pain, and then a loud cry filled the room. Baby's cry. My chest rose and fell rapidly as the doctor gently placed a small bundle beside me. The baby was red-faced and screaming, tiny fists waving in the air, dark hair plastered to a wrinkled little forehead. "It's a girl," the doctor said with a smile. My eyes widened slightly. I looked down at the tiny baby in my arms, really looked at her for the first time. She had soft dark hair and a small face that looked unbelievably peaceful now that she had stopped crying. Her little mouth was pursed in a pout, her cheeks flushed pink, her fingers curled into tiny fists. My heart melted instantly. "Hi, baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your daddy." Just then the door opened. Julian rushed inside the hospital room so quickly that even the nurse beside me stepped aside in surprise. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes wild with panic and fear and desperate hope. And when his eyes finally landed on the tiny baby resting carefully in my arms, he froze completely in the middle of the room, like someone who had just seen the most unbelievable miracle of his life. For a moment, he looked completely stunned. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. Then slowly, a smile appeared on his face. Not his usual confident smirk. Not the polite smile he wore for business meetings. Something softer. Something real. Something that made his eyes shine and his whole face transform. His eyes moved slowly from my tired face down to our daughter, wrapped in soft hospital blankets. Then his entire expression softened. "Sebastian," he whispered, his voice filled with so much emotion that it made my throat tight. I smiled weakly at him. "She couldn't wait for you," I said quietly. Julian slowly walked closer, like he was afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. And when he finally reached the bedside, he carefully wrapped his arms around both of us, holding us so gently yet so tightly at the same time that I could feel the warmth of his heartbeat against my shoulder. "Our daughter," he murmured softly. "Our little girl." He leaned down and kissed my forehead. Then he kissed the tiny head of the baby in my arms. His eyes were slightly red, his lips trembling just a little. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," he whispered. I shook my head lightly. "You made it," I said softly. "That's enough." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. Then he looked down at our daughter, who had fallen asleep against my chest, her tiny chest rising and falling with each soft breath. "She's perfect," he said. "She's absolutely perfect." I looked down at her too, at this tiny person we had created together, and felt tears sliding down my cheeks. "What should we name her?" I asked. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Lily." I looked up at him in surprise. "Lily." He nodded, his thumb brushing gently over her soft cheek. "My grandmother's name. She was the only one in my family who ever showed me what unconditional love looked like. I want our daughter to carry that." I smiled, a real smile, the first one in months that didn't feel forced. "Lily," I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. "Lily Blackwood." Our daughter kicked her little legs in her sleep, as if in approval. Julian laughed softly, the sound warm and full of wonder. "She likes it." From that day onward, Julian refused to leave our side for even a moment longer than necessary. And if there was one thing I quickly realized about Julian Blackwood as a father, it was that he had absolutely no self-control when it came to spoiling his daughter. Just 3 days after we returned home from the hospital, Julian came back one afternoon with a convoy of delivery trucks following behind him. I stood at the entrance of the house, completely confused, with Lily sleeping peacefully in the carrier strapped to my chest. "What is all this?" I asked. Julian simply smiled proudly. "Just a few things for our daughter." Few things. That was what he called it. But within the next hour, the entire living room was filled with boxes. Baby clothes, so many baby clothes, in every color and fabric imaginable. Tiny shoes and soft blankets and plush toys and wooden rattles and mobiles for the ceiling and books and stuffed animals and... I stared at the mountain of items in disbelief. "Julian," I said slowly, "she's not even a week old." He looked completely serious. "It doesn't matter. She can't even hold her head up yet. Then she'll grow into them. She has enough clothes to last her until kindergarten." "Kindergarten?" He looked horrified. "These are for now. We'll get more for kindergarten." I couldn't help laughing, a real laugh, the kind that made my stomach hurt and my eyes water. Even Martha, standing in the doorway, was trying to hide her smile. Even the bodyguards looked amused. Julian then lifted Lily carefully from the carrier, cradling her against his chest like she was the most precious treasure in the world. She blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny mouth opening in a yawn. You deserve the best, he whispered to her. Everything. Every single thing in this world. And Daddy is going to give it to you. Watching him like that, this powerful alpha CEO, this man who commanded boardrooms and made grown executives tremble, now completely undone by a 6-day-old baby, made my chest feel warm. Months ago, I was scrubbing floors in silence, wondering if he would ever come back, wondering if I would survive long enough to bring our child into the world. Now we were standing in our home, with our daughter in his arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. 2 months later, after enough rest and enough bonding and enough sleepless nights with a newborn who seemed convinced that 3 a.m. was the perfect time to be awake, Julian decided that it was finally time for something he had promised me long ago. Our wedding. It wasn't a grand ceremony like the extravagant ones the Blackwood family usually hosted. No hundreds of guests. No massive flower arrangements. No coverage in the society pages. Instead, Julian chose something smaller. More personal. The celebration took place in the gardens of the private estate where we were living, surrounded by soft lights and rows of white flowers that swayed gently under the evening breeze. Friends, close business partners, people Julian trusted, which I learned was a very short list. I stood beside him wearing a simple but beautiful white suit, holding his hand, while Lily slept peacefully in Martha's arms nearby. For a moment, I wondered if his parents would come. Julian's mother never appeared. But just before the ceremony began, a car arrived at the gate. Julian's father stepped out. The moment he walked toward us, the entire garden fell quiet. He was an imposing man, tall and broad, with the same sharp jaw and dark hair as his son, though streaked with gray at the temples. His presence was calm and commanding, the kind of authority that came from decades of power. His eyes moved toward me, then toward Lily. For a moment, I felt nervous. My scent flickered with anxiety, honey and chamomile turning sharp, and Julian squeezed my hand reassuringly. But then Julian's father gave a small, approving nod. You've chosen well, son, he said to Julian. Those simple words seemed to lift a huge weight from Julian's shoulders. I saw him exhale, saw the tension drain from his frame. Thank you, Father, Julian said quietly. During the ceremony, Julian held my hands firmly while we exchanged our vows under the warm evening lights. The words were simple, no flowery speeches or elaborate promises, just the truth. I promised I would never leave your side again, he said quietly, looking into my eyes. And I intend to keep that promise for the rest of my life. My heart trembled hearing those words. When the vows were finished, his father stepped forward and placed his hands gently over our heads. An old tradition, one I had only read about in books. You have my blessing, he said. And just like that, Julian Blackwood became my husband. That night, we celebrated with laughter and music and quiet happiness under the open sky. Lily slept peacefully nearby, completely unaware that she had already changed both of our lives forever. Sometimes I still think about the days when I was scrubbing floors inside the Blackwood mansion, wondering how long I could survive under the cruelty of someone who saw me as nothing. I think about the loneliness, the fear, the way my hands cracked and bled from the constant work, the way I would lie awake at night, one hand on my belly, talking to a baby who wasn't born yet, promising her that everything would be okay, even when I wasn't sure I believed it myself. But now I sit in the garden, watching Julian carry Lily while she giggles in his arms. She's 3 months old now, chubby-cheeked and bright-eyed, with dark hair like her father, and my smile. She laughs when Julian tosses her gently in the air. She reaches for his nose with grabby hands. She has him wrapped around her tiny fingers so completely that sometimes I wonder if he remembers he's supposed to be running a company. Again, Daddy. Lily babbles, though again sounds more like again, with a lot of extra syllables. Julian looks at me with such pure happiness in his eyes that it makes my chest ache. Again, he asks. Again. Lily shrieks. He tosses her gently, and she squeals with delight, and I realize. Every hardship I endured led me to this moment. Every cruel word. Every ache in my back. Every tear I cried on that cold mansion floor. They all brought me here, to this garden, to this man, to this baby who has both of us completely undone. And for the first time in my life, I truly feel like I'm home. Then,